This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Coronavirus confirmed cases surpassed the 1.8 million mark, with over 114 deaths reported worldwide. Nigeria, a 3-week lockdown comes to an end, but how successful has it been? We have a live report. And in Somalia, concerns mount that insecurity will hamper COVID-19 containment efforts. This is CGTN. Welcome to Africa Live with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. Also coming up on the program, OPEC members and allies led by Russia agree to cut oil output by a record 10% of global supply. And the Confederation of African Football postpones all competitions until further notice. And we begin with the latest on the COVID-19 pandemic. Worldwide, confirmed cases have surpassed 1.8 million. Over 114,000 people have died. The US has reported some 30,000 new cases. Total infections there have reached well over 500,000. That's about a third of the global total. Nearly half of all cases are in Europe, with Spain and Italy the worst hit. Iran, the epicenter in the Middle East, has registered more than 71,000 infections. The Chinese mainland reported 108 new cases on Sunday. 10 are local transmissions. The rest are imported cases. 2 new deaths have been reported. Let's now take a look at how the coronavirus has been spreading in Africa. There are over 14,000 cases spread across the continent. The Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reports that more than 2,500 people have recovered and at least 788 people have died. Only 2 of the 54 African countries are yet to report a case, the Comoros and Lesotho. And let's now take a look at the numbers by regions. North Africa has the highest number of infections. Algeria and Egypt are reporting the most cases in the region. Egypt has passed the 2,000 case mark with 2,065 confirmed cases. In West Africa, the numbers are growing as well. Nearly all affected countries have witnessed a rise in infections. In Central Africa, Cameroon has recorded the highest number of infections, and the government is making it compulsory to wear a mask in public spaces. East Africa remains the least affected region. Kenya and Djibouti are reporting the most cases and have been ramping up containment measures. Elsewhere in Southern Africa, South Africa still has the highest recorded number of cases on the continent. It has 6 times the number of cases as Mauritius, the second most affected nation in the region. Well, let's now go to Ethiopia and find out what the situation is in Ethiopia, because the country there, the country's health authorities have announced that a door-to-door coronavirus monitoring and testing exercise will begin this week. The government said this as an important measure which will allow it to establish the exact number of COVID-19 cases in the country. Ethiopia currently has close to 75 confirmed COVID-19 cases, with 3 deaths reported in the country. Here is CGTN's Girum Chala with more.
Ethiopian health officials emphasize the importance of conducting as many tests as possible to paint the real picture of COVID-19 cases across the country. And for that, the strategy of door-to-door testing is being worked on. The first round of this work is planned to begin in the capital, Addis Ababa, this week. The city's Mayor Takalo Uma and the Ethiopian Ministry of Health will majorly and jointly lead this important campaign. And for that, close to 1,500 retired health workers are called back and have rejoined the task force put together to reach the millions of city residents. According to the detailed activities announced, the health workers will first conduct general assessments of the coronavirus situation in the city by taking vital signs like temperature and work on strong contact tracing. These activities are to rapidly be expedited to the rest of the nation as well. Ethiopia currently has close to 75 COVID-19 confirmed cases with 3 days and 10 recoveries. And the country is under a 5-month state of emergency. Grumtala CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, a 14-day lockdown imposed in Lagos and Abuja and Ogun State comes to an end today. And in neighboring Ghana, police say they will step up measures to enforce a lockdown imposed to curb the coronavirus outbreak. Well, let's cross over to Accra and join our correspondent there, Nabil Ahmed Rufai. He's got the very latest from Ghana. Nabil, the lockdown in Ghana is now in its 3rd week, and police have announced that they will step up the enforcement measures. How are police going to do this, and is it because people are not obeying the current regulations?
Yes, police personnel have had a tough time really enforcing the lockdown period within the last 2 weeks. There were people who were still finding their way into
Nabil Ahmed Rufai joining us there from Accra. Unfortunately, we have lost him for the moment, but we will be returning to Nabil if we can. Well, let's now find out what's going on in Kenya, because the government has made it mandatory to wear masks, especially in public places, in an effort to slow down the spread of COVID-19. And in Kitui County, a garment factory has shifted gear and is now focusing on producing surgical masks for the entire nation. Let's take a look. The Chinese government says it has zero tolerance for discrimination against foreign nationals, and it is working to improve disease control work related to African nationals. A foreign ministry statement comes amid reports of racial discrimination against the African community in the southern city of Guangzhou. The ministry says all foreigners in China are treated equally, and the city's authorities are working to provide better healthcare services. The measures include designating hotels for foreigners under medical observation and price adjustment for those in need. The government says local authorities will set up more effective communication channels with foreign consulates. In a related story, our reporter Ho Weiwei talked to a Tanzanian businessman in Guangzhou to see how he and his family are doing.
Frankly speaking, I've been in Guangzhou for so many years. I haven't seen any kind of discrimination against me. I could see from the social media, many were complaining. They were feeling some kind of stigmatization. But then on my side, I always told them, I don't believe the Chinese can do that against Africans. One, we have long-term relationship. Two, the Chinese felt the pinch in the first days of the outbreaks, because even Chinese living abroad, we are complaining about that, about being stigmatized, about being related to the virus. I said they all have a lesson, and there's no way Chinese will do that to the Africans. So what I think is maybe a misunderstanding.
I got to know John in 2018. He runs foreign trade business in Guangzhou. Now he's been put under quarantine for days. Despite inconvenience, he doesn't complain.
What I believe and what I've seen, the Chinese government has been working so hard. I think they have done quite a lot. So when they tell me to quarantine myself, or when they come to quarantine me, I know they are trying their best to contain the problem. The local CDC came here at our home. They did test all of us. They tested the whole family. Yeah, it's me, my wife, and 3 kids. We were all good, yeah. The test was mandatory but was free, yes.
John shows me his family.
Yeah, this is our daily routine. That's my wife on the other side. And my son. Always we are trying to do some workout a little bit, work out our bodies. Okay, you can look at me, my dear wife. Yeah, my son, look at me. Great. And then on the other side, my daughter is busy finishing up her choreographies.
If you want to buy some food or daily necessities, how will you do that?
Well, yes, I'm not allowed to go out, but then if I want some foods, we order online, and then the community here, they have the management, they have arranged someone, just inform them that whatever I want to buy, and then they'll just pick it from downstairs and bring it upstairs. And also they would come in to collect my trash. We are supporting what the Chinese government is doing. Few were running against it because I guess they didn't know much about what was going on.
Thank you very much, John.
何伟伟 CGTN 广州。The New York Times has published a series of reports detailing how it says President Trump has failed to handle the pandemic. Timothy Ulrich takes a look at some of the findings.
A bombshell report on the White House's response, revealing who knew what, when, and how much.
It became clear that we were in real trouble.
When was that? When was that?
Well, that was probably towards the middle to end of January.
The New York Times says in early January, the National Security Council received a report predicting the spread of the coronavirus to the U.S. The NSC soon began urging officials to draw up plans to quarantine a city the size of Chicago. The Times also detailed a memo from Trump's top trade advisor, Peter Navarro. It predicted 500,000 deaths and trillions of dollars in economic losses in the U.S. because of the virus. And the New York Times reports Trump was aware of Navarro's memo. That memo was issued January 29th, but President Trump says he didn't see it until earlier this month. The newspaper also says Alex Azar, one of America's top health advisors, warned Trump twice about the virus in January.
President Trump.
And the second time Azar warned the president on January 30th, Trump called him an alarmist. About a month passed. Several measures were put in place, like a travel ban from China, but it wasn't enough for some health officials. The New York Times report documents the biggest pushback the White House faced. On February 25th, Dr. Nancy Messonnier released a public warning. Messonnier is the head of the National Center for Immunization and Respiratory Diseases, part of the CDC. She set off the alarm bells on the possibility of community spread.
It's not so much a question of if this will happen anymore, but rather more a question of exactly when this will happen.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Trump was on a plane headed back to the U.S. when the warning was released. He had just wrapped up a trip to India. And he watched from Air Force One as the stock market crashed. The New York Times reports Trump sidelined Alex Azar in response and put his Vice President Mike Pence in charge of Azar's task force. Both investigations by the New York Times and the Washington Post report the reason for Trump's slowed response. They both say the president was trying to keep gains made in the markets in preparation for November elections. But he lost the gains he made during his time in office and faces the world's largest and deadliest outbreak to boot. Timothy Ulrich, CGTN.
And staying in the United States, most Americans have spent Easter holidays at home as authorities weigh a decision on when to let businesses start up again. Here's CGTN's Toby Muse.
The debate here in the United States is growing ever more intense about when can the United States reopen, when can the economy get back to work. Now that's led to some in the medical establishment to explain the reasons for why these restrictions that we've seen imposed so far need to be maintained in the short term in order to help curb the spread of the coronavirus.
We are hoping that at the end of the month we could look around and say, okay, is there any element here that we can safely and cautiously start pulling back on? If so, do it. If not, then just continue to hunker down.
President Trump says that he will create an Opening Our Country Council on Tuesday, bringing together a mix of business leaders and doctors to work together to see how to reopen the economy. This comes amid increasingly dire projections for the US economy. JP Morgan economists predict the second quarter the economy could contract by 40%. They note 16.8 million people have filed jobless claims in recent weeks, but believe that figure could reach 25 million Americans by the end of April. That would be an unemployment rate of 20%. Trump has said that it will be the toughest decision he's ever made when he decides to reopen the economy. He's promised to listen to both health officials and business leaders. Trump had hoped to reopen the economy by today, Easter Sunday, but the social distancing guidelines in the end were extended until April 30th. All of this comes as some Americans celebrate Easter this Sunday. Many have had to be creative in how they spent the day, with many churches live streaming events in order to avoid bringing people together and so exposing them to the coronavirus. Some churches, however, said that they would hold events, defying local authorities. That led New Mexico to extend a ban on mass gatherings to now include churches. Just how radically different Americans celebrated Easter is a sign of just how the coronavirus has upended this country. Toby Muse, CGTN, Washington.
In Spain too, Easter has been largely silent. Rahul Pathak is in Madrid with more.
Holy Week in Spain. Easter celebrations traditionally mean elaborate processions, streets packed with worshippers carrying centuries-old floats, coming together to commemorate the resurrection of Jesus. This year it's a very different picture. Seville, Barcelona and here in Madrid, pews are empty, no processions, and the worshippers have been told to stay at home. Even the Spanish Civil War didn't stop Holy Week in the country's major cities. Like much of everyday life, the coronavirus has changed everything.
The truth is, we've never experienced a situation like this before, such emptiness. People like us who've never experienced a war or serious conflict in society. I think we're managing to get through this in a more normal way. Right now, we're trying to stay calm.
The Church of Jesus Medina Celi is the focal point for the Madrid Easter procession that attracts close to 1 million people. Its doors still remain open to help the homeless, but baptisms, weddings and even confessions are banned. Now, under normal circumstances, these pews and aisles would be full with up to 800 worshippers. But because of the coronavirus outbreak and the subsequent lockdown, for many people, the only way they can practice their faith is online. Daily services throughout Holy Week are now streamed on platforms such as YouTube, so the congregation can still attend the service, albeit virtually. And many believe the need for the church is stronger than ever.
Each one of us has different experiences in life, and each person believes in something in his or her own way. I think that faith always brings hope to our lives. I always like to define faith or understand faith as something that helps you face problems in your life without losing yourself.
The Vatican has suggested that Easter celebrations could be postponed till mid-September. But for now, what for many is the centre of the community remains eerily silent. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
French military planes aboard a virus-stricken aircraft carrier have returned to their base in western France. The Charles de Gaulle is France's only aircraft carrier in service. It's been in lockdown since 50 of its crew tested positive for the coronavirus. 3 sailors have been flown to hospital for treatment. Medical experts have been dispatched to try to stop the virus from spreading among the 1,700 personnel. And researchers from Germany and the United Kingdom say they've identified 3 distinct strains of COVID-19. Their findings were published in the U.S. Scientific Journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. They analyzed 160 genomes from patients and found that the coronavirus strain in Wuhan mutated from an earlier version. CGTN spoke with Peter Foster, who's the lead author of the study.
What I wanted to do in this research, together with my colleagues, is to identify the original viral genome, the original viral genome type, because the virus mutates, it changes, and you get variants arising, and which is the original one. Because all these mutations have happened without anybody realizing a disease is among us. The first genome that we have is from Christmas Eve in 2019, which is 24th of December, obviously, and what came before that, we don't know. That is the aim of the paper, and what we have reconstructed is the network of possible trees, how it evolved. We've got all the realistic trees included in this network at one glance, which is what other methods can't do. And then we apply what we call an outgroup. That means an independent non-human virus, which tells us inside this cluster of trees, which is the oldest virus genome. Yeah. And as an outgroup, you need something which is non-human. So what do you take? You take the bat coronavirus, because that's very closely related to us. And if you apply that, you find out that a location in the network, which we've called type A, is the original type that would have infected humans.
Okay.
And then it would mutated and change into a type B. This type B was then the first genome to be picked up in Wuhan when the disease became apparent. Researchers might be forgiven for thinking at the time that B is the original type, but actually it's not. It's type A, which in Wuhan is only a minority type, but B has become the majority type during the outbreak. And that is mutated further into C. Now, the C type is not found in the early phase of the outbreak in mainland China. It is found outside. For example, it's well represented in Singapore. I didn't, in fact, start my research in Wuhan. My research started when I realized in early February that the outbreak was a serious matter, not simply like a flu epidemic, and that I needed to start right away with my colleagues to understand how the virus was evolving before it really spreads across the world.
You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead on the program. The Democratic Republic of Congo reports a second Ebola-related death. And in Somalia, concerns mount that insecurity will hamper COVID-19 containment efforts.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Nigeria is my home. 160 million vibrant, ambitious individuals constantly seeking the perfect self-expression. It is these people who inspired me to be that person that is seen, to be a voice that is heard, and ultimately to be the anchor that I am. I have to tap in, tune in, and turn on the very best qualities within me to deliver the news. I'm Richard Nta, an anchor for CGTN.
Well, let's now cross over to the Democratic Republic of Congo, where a second Ebola-related death has been recorded. The country had previously gone 52 days without registering any new cases. The first death was confirmed on Friday, just 2 days before the World Health Organization was set to declare the outbreak as over. CGTN's Chris Ochamringa has more from Kinshasa.
A World Health Organization official in the DRC says the second Ebola death occurred in the Eastern Territory of Beni. The victim was an 11-month-old girl. She's reported to have received treatment at the same health center where a 26-year-old man who tested positive for Ebola on Friday was. Health experts are still trying to find out how the man got the disease. They say he had no known contacts of other Ebola patients and was not a survivor who could have relapsed. The WHO has identified 215 people who came into contact with him before he died. The new cases are a big setback to the DRC that was expecting to declare the outbreak over. More than 2,200 people have died of Ebola since it was first declared in August 2018. The disease has occurred in an active conflict zone in eastern DRC, which has made it difficult for healthcare workers to contain it. Chris Sochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
In Somalia, there are concerns that insecurity will hamper efforts to contain the COVID-19 outbreak in the country. This is amid increasing Al-Shabaab attacks. So far, 21 infections have been detected, with 1 death and 2 recoveries. CGTN's Abdulaziz Bello reports from Mogadishu.
These forces have secured a strategic town from Al-Shabaab. For years, the group used Janale as a launching base to strike security forces and mount deadly attacks in the capital, Mogadishu. Not far from Janale, a top militant commander and one of the founders of the group was killed in a targeted U.S. drone strike as Allied troops pushed with an offensive to defeat the insurgent group. Despite recent successes against Al-Shabaab, the group continues to mount guerrilla attacks on major towns. Its recent victims include a medical doctor, a regional governor, clan elders and security personnel. There are concerns that insecurity will likely hamper efforts to combat COVID-19. The country has reported dozens of positive cases of the coronavirus. Somalia's international partners, including the United Nations, European Union and the US government, are now calling for an end to all acts of terrorism to enable assistance to reach all communities in need.
Achieving a ceasefire or end to hostility in Somalia will be hard. We have competing powers in Somalia. Al-Shabaab doesn't recognize the Somali government or the United Nations. The government, on the other end, regards the group as a terror organization. During these tough times, we need unity of purpose.
Health officials have increased awareness campaigns on social media and on the streets of the capital. The country recently acquired a diagnostic lab with funding from the World Health Organization.
We are expected to prepare ourselves in order to prevent this disease from spreading further. We have seen how the disease has overwhelmed health facilities in developed and powerful countries. As a government, we are ready at all times to ensure the safety and well-being of our public.
Awareness campaigns can be done across the country. People can practice social distancing as preventative measures, but the truth remains the same. An outbreak in Somalia will be a disaster. We hope it doesn't reach that level.
For now, a ban on intercity travel, including local flights, are some of the preventative measures authorities have put in place to contain the spread of the virus. The biggest concern for now remains as to how the government will handle a potential outbreak of the virus in militant-controlled areas. Abdulaziz Bello, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
As South African President Cyril Ramaphosa calls for calm and a united front in the fight against coronavirus, people living under the lockdown are coming to terms with a second one. Angelo Coppola reports on several unintended consequences of the lockdown.
Cybersecurity is a growing problem. While people working for the big corporates have firewalls and established protocols to work with from home, the small and medium business owners are more exposed.
And so I think the big danger, probably the first issue is, are the devices that people are using secure? Are they protected with internet security? Also, are people doing updates as soon as they're available for that app or for the operating system? Because those two things alone are going to seriously raise the bar in terms of security if people are doing that.
On a criminal level, violence against women and children remains a major problem in South Africa, and the lockdown appears to have made the problem worse.
The non-governmental organizations that usually fill in the gap where there is shortages of services
they are not listed as essential in this time of lockdown. So it means even in communities where there was violence, where we know the patterns of violence, where you had non-governmental and activists responding firsthand, they can't be there.
Another community in distress are the poor and the homeless. Many of these people relied on government shelters and handouts. The lockdown changed all of that. There's a growing desperation creeping in as people begin to fight for food.
And now, that's why they call the police and the soldiers to come join us, because the people, they're uncontrollable. Because they were starting to fight, they said, hey, you guys are liars and things like that, you know. People are hungry outside here, you know what I'm saying?
With South Africa in its second national lockdown, the authorities couldn't have foreseen that protecting the country would have side effects.
While the idea was a good one, the unintended consequences are going to be with us for a long time. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
To Afghanistan now, and the Taliban says it will release 20 Afghan government prisoners. This is the first handover since February's peace deal between the Taliban and the U.S. Since Wednesday, the Afghan government has released 300 Taliban prisoners. Experts see the move as a positive sign towards ending the 18-year U.S. military involvement in Afghanistan. Let's now take a look at your business news. Here's what's ahead. OPEC members and allies led by Russia agree to cut oil output by a record 10% of global supply. And Egypt reduces pump prices of fuel, but impact is yet to be felt in the market.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
OPEC and allies led by Russia have agreed to cut oil output by a record amount, around 10% of global supply, to support oil prices amid the coronavirus pandemic. OPEC Plus said on Sunday it had agreed to reduce output by 9.7 million barrels per day for the period from May to June. This follows 4 days of marathon talks and following pressure from U.S. President Donald Trump to arrest the price decline. The biggest oil output cut ever. The countries will keep gradually decreasing curbs on production in place for 2 years until April 2022. Banks Goldman Sachs and UBS predicted last week a 10 to 15% cut in supply might not be enough to arrest the price decline, saying Brent prices would fall back to $20 per barrel from $32 at the moment and $70 at the start of the year. Measures to slow the spread of coronavirus have destroyed demand for fuel and driven down oil prices, straining budgets of oil producers and hammering the more vulnerable U.S. shale industry. The African Union has appointed former Credit Suisse boss Djane Thiam and several other dignitaries as special envoys to solicit support to help the continent deal with the economic impact of COVID-19. The envoy team, which was named by the African Union chairman as South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, is tasked with finding rapid and concrete help pledged by the G20, the European Union and other financial institutions. The African Union said in a statement that these institutions need to support African economies that are facing serious economic challenges with a comprehensive stimulus package. Former Credit Suisse boss Djane Thiam has called for a standstill on debt to private creditors amid the outbreak of coronavirus, which threatens many African economies. The boss of South Africa's Vodacom, Shamil Josub, will donate a third of his salary for the next 3 months to support a fund set up in response to the coronavirus outbreak. Josub joins the heads of other major companies, including Lenders First Rand and Nedbank, in heeding calls from President Ramaphosa for others to follow the government's lead. Ramaphosa earlier said top official salaries would be cut by the same amount for the same period. Josub received $630,000 in best pay and benefits in 2019, according to the company's annual report. The Egyptian government has decided to cut gasoline prices for the second consecutive time this year. Since Egypt lifted subsidies on power, the country reviews its fuel pricing every 3 months, but the price cuts are way less than the global drop in oil markets. CGTN's Adel Mahroui says this week's price cuts are too small for most Egyptians to feel.
Following up with the drop in oil prices, Egypt's Fuel Pricing Committee has introduced a minor cut for the public. All gasoline grades dropped 1.5 US cents per liter, while diesel remained steady.
There is a 30 US cents difference in the gallon. It's not bad. For drivers who use a lot of fuel, it will make a difference. But for us, our cars have small tanks, about 50 to 70 liters, so on average, it will make a $1 difference. That is not enough for me to ask for less money from passengers. And who knows, fuel prices could go up again.
While crude oil dropped by more than 60% since the year began, Egypt so far has cut fuel prices by only 6%, which hasn't impacted prices in Egyptian markets.
The drop in the oil prices is not reflected in the price cuts. That may be due to the inefficiency in the state management or high production cost of gasoline due to monopolization production. But we must take into consideration other factors like the price the government has paid in its current oil reserve, and for how long will the current low prices last.
Mazut has seen an 8.2% cut in its price, which could be considered a government-led stimulus for industries to cope with the pressing economic circumstances COVID-19 is causing.
I didn't expect a bigger drop in fuel prices. First of all, we're under tight economic pressure. Secondly, the government doesn't have any resources to support the nation. I don't think it's wise to ask for a bigger reduction in gasoline prices.
Since Egypt began lifting power subsidies, the government formed a committee to review oil pricing every 3 months. The law sets a maximum of 10% change in current domestic prices. Vehicle owners are the prime benefactors from this new price cut. However, it's not significant. And for the rest of the people, no one is expecting much changes in their livelihoods. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
South Africa could lose 2 million jobs by year-end due to the effects of the coronavirus pandemic. Some economists are now warning of a massive spike over and above the country's already high unemployment rate of 29%. The spread of COVID-19 has brought almost every industry to a near standstill, adding to an already poor economic situation in South Africa. Here's Sumitra Naidu with that report.
The South African Reserve Bank lowered its growth forecast for the economy to a 4% contraction this year. In its biannual review, the bank warned of an economic tsunami.
You'll see on the left-hand side for the formal sector, the shock that we see could end up being something like a 370,000 jobs lost in the formal sector. And on the right-hand side, we'd be looking at something like 1,600 businesses go insolvent in 2020.
The unemployment rate in South Africa is already at a record high. Analysts are now warning that these figures could double as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Economist Mike Schisler expects 1.6 million job losses in the formal sector by the end of June.
That will obviously have knock-on effects into domestic servants and the informal sector. So we expect around 2 million job losses this year. Ultimately, we thought the 29% would become 30 or 30.5%. Now we think the 29% high unemployment rate we have is very much on its way to around 37%. If you have only 40% of your adults working instead of 60 or 70%, that really has a very big influence.
Economic activity has ground to a halt. Companies are struggling to hold on to workers, and it's not clear whether the lockdown will be extended.
We need to have a sober conversation with the social partners and collectively work together and realize that going forward, the future is going to change. The global economic system is going to change, and some of the so-called solutions of the past are going to be redundant. So what we need is to sober up and have sober, normal conversations and hope for the best.
Government and the private sector are making a joint effort to keep businesses alive and their staff employed.
The fact that the government is putting up a temporary employment relief scheme, or TERS, is very, very good, but I doubt that we have enough money. We also know that the UN has said we should have a jobs fund, and we know that business is keen on a job fund. We know that the UIF does not have enough money, so this is really a situation that I think the TERS scheme is going to help, but it won't stop mass layoffs that we expect.
The massive hike in unemployment is going to push up poverty in South Africa, another challenge that the country was struggling with before COVID-19. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
And we'll stay in South Africa for the moment, where before the COVID-19 pandemic upended decades of habit and tradition, working from home was considered a rather rare privilege. Now, however, it is a necessity for most of us. Here's CGTN's Julie Shire examining how employees in Africa's most industrialized economy are coping with this sudden change.
South Africa's economic engine continues to turn, albeit slowly. Non-essential workers have taken their jobs home, while the state focuses on slowing the spread of the virus. Young millennial Billy Muka is a project manager at Kalu Media. It's been an easy adjustment for her.
I do feel a little bit more productive because I can manage my day in a sense that I can allocate time to specific tasks. I still work from an 8:30 to 4:30 basis, so I'm still keeping in my routine, but I'm not so stressed about, getting to work on time. For me, getting to work means at least I've gotten ready in the morning, my laptop is open, my phone is on, and I can start my mornings.
Muka is among the fortunate with a laptop, a smartphone, and a stable internet connection to work from home. But not everyone can log on remotely.
We had to be conscious of the fact that there were some of our employees where they were, which is more in the township on the outskirts of your normal suburbs. The connectivity wasn't too good. Employers have to find a way of letting them either take leave or find a way of how do we still make sure that we continue to pay you without doing much.
Mines and factories make up for a large part of South Africa's workforce and have been forced to comply with the mandatory closure. But this could change the future for office-based workers.
If you look at your mining, if you look at your energy, at some of your manufacturing, these are the things that can be done on site. These ones, they can be done remotely. So we don't have to now have employees all the time being with us working. How can we learn to adapt in this new way based on the learnings?
I've been able to focus on my primary job, which is at Kalu Media, but try and work on my other ventures that I'd like to start up with, being an influencer, fitness and training and all that kind of stuff. All of those doors have opened up for me as we are being quarantined or being self-isolated at this time.
A work-from-home culture has been in place in South Africa even before the lockdown. It is easier and more convenient.
The only problem is trying to log off. Julie Shire, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
And we still have more news for you here in the program. Here's what's ahead. Fighting the coronavirus, a new initiative to support African migrants launched in Tunisia.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
A COVID-19 African Solidarity Cell has been launched in Tunisia. And as CGTN's Adnan Chauchi explains, the initiative seeks to support African migrants in the country during the outbreak.
Jean-Ferdinand Moino is the president of the Association of African Students and Trainees in Tunisia. The structure is one of the main components of the African Solidarity Cell, providing aid and assistance to sub-Saharan nationals.
The African Solidarity Cell is the fruit of the collaboration between many associations. We are collecting and distributing donations to the most vulnerable individuals.
The Association for Leadership and Development in Africa is also one of the main partner organizations in the project. Dozens of volunteers have joined the solidarity effort, which started on social media.
Some individuals, enterprises, as well as embassies are supporting the cell by giving food and necessary products. The Tunisian civil society is also very active. It is open to the public.
During a hearing session at the House of the People's Representatives, the Minister of Higher Education and members of the Tunisian and African parliaments shed light on the state support to foreign students and migrants. Hundreds of people who are in irregular situation will also benefit from assistance.
The whole world is facing a humanitarian crisis, which is the result of the humanitarian and economic impacts of the coronavirus pandemic. The solidarity with all African students and sub-Saharan migrants is Tunisia's responsibility.
The Ministry of Social Affairs has urged mayors and civil society organizations to intervene in order to suspend the rent payments of the African migrant tenants and students. The COVID-19 African Solidarity Cell has called on Prime Minister Elias El-Farfer to decree a total exemption from penalties for illegal residents. This measure would help thousands of migrants who have been affected socially and economically by the pandemic. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Well, let's now take a look at your sports news. Here's what's coming up. The Confederation of African Football postpones all competitions until further notice.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The Confederation of African Football has postponed the two top continental club competitions until further notice. Here's CGTN's Adel Mahroui with that report.
On Saturday, the Confederation of African Football has decided to postpone all matches scheduled in May. CAF's emergency committee announced an open-ended delay to the Champions League and the Confederation Cup semi-finals, as well as the Under-17 Women World Cup qualifiers.
We're expecting the postponement could last until mid-June if the coronavirus pandemic gets better. But otherwise, we're expecting further delays for all matches. It is a logical decision. It has huge financial losses, but there's nowhere safe to play football on earth right now.
With CAF's decision this weekend, all African competitions are now officially postponed indefinitely, including the Africa Cup of Nations and World Cup qualifiers.
The situation is not catastrophic yet. In the Champions League and the Confederations Cup, there are only 5 matches remaining that can easily be recovered. Once the coronavirus threat is over, CAF can in 4 weeks catch up and begin the new season.
So far, the situation could be recoverable, but that may not be for long. COVID-19 has not reached its peak yet in most African countries.
It may take the continent several months to recover from the pandemic. Cancelling competitions is not yet an option for CAF, but that might not last for long. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
In East Africa, the COVID-19 lockdown has brought about a determination and resilience among sportspersons. CGTN's Leon Sinyange spoke to some of Uganda's top athletes about what they're doing to stay in prime condition.
No Africa Cup of Nations qualifiers and no league football to play for Uganda's national soccer team captain and goalkeeper Dennis Onyango. But the South Africa best player isn't letting the coronavirus get between him and his training.
Individual training is not easy because you must push yourself, you must motivate yourself all the time, but there's nothing we can do. We have to face the challenge right now that everyone is facing.
Ugandan badminton star Edwin Ekering is doing it differently in the Netherlands. This has been his daily routine for 2 weeks now.
I have 3 exercises which I have to do. I have the cycling, as you see, that's the bike, my bike. This is skipping rope. I have to do skipping rope. I have to cycle, and I have 10 jumps. After 10 jumps, and then I go back to cycling, skipping, 10 jumps again.
The COVID-19 outbreak has caused a global health crisis. Half the world's population is now under stay-at-home orders, and nearly every mass gathering has been cancelled, including many of the world's biggest sporting events. Cricketers, volleyball players and even boxers use the facility behind me here for training and sometimes for competitions. But it has been closed for more than a week now. It is still uncertain how soon it will leave and open. Anything and anywhere will do now. For the 800 meters world champion Halima Nakai, it is the village roads and not the national stadium.
My mind is strong. I follow the rules and regulations they put, but any opportunity I get to do maybe some jogging, I have to make sure that I do it.
The number of coronavirus cases worldwide continues to rise, and it may take a long while before these athletes get back to competitive sports. Leon Sinyange, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
In La Liga, Real Sociedad have abandoned a plan to let players practice individually at the team's training complex. The club now says they will keep doing